ready for another archetype? And who's ready for the worst archetype? All right, so that may be a matter of opinion, but I'm going to stick with it. So this is the archetype of the vampire. And it is exactly what it sounds like. And I'm going to ask you to stay very open today to seeing if you have any of this archetype in you. Because of course, like every single archetype, there's a spectrum. So are you on the vampire spectrum? Okay. The vampire, let's go into the shadow. It's almost all shadow, guys. So let's go into it. The vampire is the person who exhausts you. This is the person who you see their number on your caller ID and you're like, oh, I can't with it. This is the person that needs something from you energetically and takes from you energetically. And you may not be totally aware of it when it's happening, but you just know that every time you're around that person, you feel depleted. You feel like they took something from you. Okay? The few people who come to my mind with this archetype have not changed. They have been like this from the very first time I met them. And even though the two people that are coming to my mind right now have both been on a spiritual path for a long time, it hasn't helped. It hasn't helped this archetype. This is the people who have a deep, deep wound that never gets filled. I don't have them very often as clients because typically vampire archetypes, most of them do not want to pay to get help. But the ones who do want to pay to get help will often blame the person they're paying for not fixing them instead of taking their own accountability. And they will really, really defend themselves. So, for instance, this is the client that will sit across from me and their whole session will be them telling me how everyone else in their life is at fault, how nobody gives them anything. No, these are the nobody ever takes care of me. Nobody ever cares about me. People leave me out. And it's like there's no amount of doing things for them that makes any difference. They never are very grateful, or it's always the lack that they're focused on. And it's extremely draining. They'll leave a session. I've actually one time had someone like this leave a session and I literally laid on my floor whimpering because I was so depleted after the session. There's just that feeling of a black hole of need for validation, for energy. A lot of times they're passive aggressive. They somehow make you feel like you've done something wrong, even when you haven't. It's like you just sort of have a knowing that it would never be enough, no matter what you would ever do for them or how you would ever show up for them, that it would never quite be enough. And it almost feels, if we're in a friendship with someone like this, it almost feels abusive. It almost feels like panicky. The other thing is, a lot of times vampires, you feel like you have to walk on eggshells around them because they're so easily offended, so easily hurt. They use their sensitivity like they wear it like a badge. And how dare you have hurt me? How dare you have hurt my feelings or said that thing or offended me? They're always offended. The vampire archetype will have lots of stories about how the people in their life have been awful to them. Everyone has been awful to them. So here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to risk offending by saying, if you feel like everyone in your life has been awful to you, you're the common denominator, and there's a good chance that you have some vampire archetype going on. If you never feel satisfied, you never feel well, you never feel completely loved, then there's a good chance you've got vampire archetype going on. And if you know someone like this, it's easier to recognize outside of yourself. It's hard for me when I'm doing an archetype reading and they have vampire energy because they will not see it. A vampire is 99% of the time in denial about being a vampire, which is why this archetype rarely comes into the light. It is about as likely as a vampire is going to come into the light as a narcissist is going to admit they're a narcissist and do something about it. It typically takes a tremendous amount of courage and accountability. So the medicine for the vampire archetype is accountability. The medicine is when they see that they're the common denominator and they go, oh my gosh, really? Every single person in my entire life has been horrible to me and it's never my fault? Something's off here. I got to start looking at where I'm creating this. Because for this archetype, even if they're nice on the surface, which honestly often they are, you just find yourself being repelled by their energy, either by their neediness or by the feeling that you know you can never satisfy them. They're unpleasable. Vampires often will talk about their health issues a lot. They'll talk about how people have wronged them a lot. So there has a lot of crossover with the martyr and the victim. And in fact, the vampire, martyr, and victim are a trifecta that often and kind of tragically goes together. So if someone has all three of those archetypes in their major arcana, it is possible to heal that, but again, it takes a tremendous amount of accountability and of willingness to see where they are the common denominator in these patterns in their life. You guys, if a pattern keeps showing up for you in every part of your life over a long period of time, you are the common denominator there, right? This is what I had to see for myself with the martyr is, okay, that's me. That's me that always has these experiences that lead to me overgiving or whatever. We have to be willing to look at this and ask ourselves, do we have some of this? It doesn't mean, even if it's in your minor arcana, it can be really affecting your life. So how I can feel some of y'all being paranoid right now, like, oh no, is she talking about me? Here's one thing to look for. If you think you may have this archetype, I want you to really stop for a second and be willing to look for this. First of all, do people baby you? Do people feel like they have to be very careful around you and they're afraid of speaking too bluntly? You may have the vampire archetype. Do people not invite you a lot of places and you find out a lot of times that your friends are hanging out without you? Do they not seem that happy when they run into you, but they're very, very like, oh, hi, careful not to say the wrong thing. So a combination of not that happy to see you, but also careful to not say the wrong thing, to not offend you. Like these are the things you really need to look for and question, am I coming across? Do I have an energy of taking? Do I have an energy of being, I've noticed sometimes what goes along with this one too is like manic depression. So either really heavy, low energy, or when you're around someone who is high energy that you can feed off of, you get like excited and manic and talk too much because you're taking from their energy. So if it is you, then just be accountable and start to look for, maybe even reach out to, your therapist or your coach and ask how you can really start to shift this. Because the vampire who comes into the light can be a very amazing person and have the ability to help other vampires. I'm sitting here, I don't want to be hopeless about this one, guys, but I'm looking at how many vampires I've ever seen come into the light with it. I don't know that I've ever seen a vampire come into the light with it, but I do believe absolutely that it's possible. If you're the one dealing with someone in your life who is a vampire, here are the signs. You will feel way more energy when you're away from them than when you're with them. After you've been with them, you will feel depleted for a period of time. You'll have to do massive self-care before being with them, like psych yourself up to be with them. You'll find yourself walking on eggshells. You'll find yourself being very frustrated, feeling like you're wasting your time. And then after you've been with them, you're going to have to do massive self-care to get back. If you've been in a relationship with this person, it usually doesn't last, honestly, unless both people have like a martyr and a vampire can be together, because the martyr will feel like they need to overgive and the vampire overtakes. The vampire also thinks they give a lot, but they actually don't. They take so much more than they give. And when they do give, there's usually a feeling of agenda about it, like they're going to use it against you or hold it against you, or they only give to get. So another way that if you have this archetype that you can bring it into the light is to start to truly give without any expectation in return. Like really give and then not expect anything and don't get upset when you don't get anything in return. That's a really good way to start to heal the vampires, to give freely from a free and willing heart. But going back to how to recognize if someone in your life has this, you really will just not want to be around them. And you may not even understand why. You're like, gosh, they're nice. Why don't I ever want to invite them over? Yeah, because they deplete you, because they're actually living off of your energy. They're taking from you usually in more than one way, but definitely energetically taking from you. You'll notice that the conversation will be about 90% about them. You'll notice that when you're struggling, they can't be there for you. And even if they are, it will be in a very perfunctory sort of way, like, oh, I'm sorry to hear you're going through that. Anyway, back to me. Oh my gosh, my boss this, and my ex-husband this, and they'll be exhausting with their negativity, and any of their positivity will be very surfacey. They're not happy. They may be manic sometimes, but they're just not happy because, again, it's that sucking wound that they feel abandoned all the time. It's a codependent archetype. Typically, they'll have been if they are married, it will have been a very, very hard marriage where they never feel like they get their needs met. And that's really what it comes down to in one sentence for the vampire archetype, is there's no such thing as them feeling like they've gotten their needs met. So, the main way this comes up is people come to me in a session, they'll start describing somebody in their life, and I'll go there, and I'll recognize that as the vampire. So here's how to deal with the vampire. Very, very strong boundaries, and don't try to buffer reality for them. Okay? You try to get into their world and figure out what will offend them, or what will make them feel bad about themselves, or what will make them feel abandoned. Well, that in and of itself will exhaust you. So a good portion of how the vampire depletes someone is by that person trying to manage the vampire's emotions and experience. So you've got to really just let them have whatever experience they have and not try to fix it or buffer that for them. The other thing is that really limit your time with them. Now, this sounds mean, and a lot of people are like, but it's my child who's the vampire. Well, if you have a grown child who's a vampire, I'm really, really sorry to hear that. But you still have to limit that. If you have a small child who's a vampire, you need to figure out how to help them and how to bring them back to accountability over and over and over. You basically don't enable this archetype if you have a child. Well, you don't enable it in anybody, but especially if it's you have an 11-year-old that sucks the life out of you. It's your job as the parent to try to help them shift this archetype through accountability. Accountability, self-awareness, and generosity are the medicine. In my opinion, always, this is in my opinion. But can you recognize this one? So if it's not in your small, your child that's under the age of 18, not an adult child, then you otherwise limit your time with them and don't buffer reality for them and don't let them take your energy. Don't fall for it, basically. You can even say, you can be loving and kind, but even say, well, if everyone in your life is wronging you, then, can that be true? Like in a loving, kind way, maybe you could even be a clear mirror to help them see that's just not reality. Like, I'm looking at my life and I'm thinking, have I been wronged? At this point, I see my part in all of it. But is every single person in my life treating me like that? Absolutely not. Not by a long shot. Right? So, for those of you paranoid now that you may have this one, if you get invited lots of places and people are happy to see you, and they seem to get energy when they're around, there's a give and take of energy when you're around them, then no, you don't have this. But it is hard to admit to ourselves when that's not the case. I always look for how that initial reaction when I run into somebody, right? I ran into a high school friend of mine at a restaurant last week, and the second that she locked eyes with me, I saw this like brightness and this excitement come into them. I'm like, okay, that's a really good sign. And that's not me bragging. That's me observing. How do people react when they see me? Do people leave my presence lighter and happier and more filled with energy? Or do they leave my presence, tired? It's our job to be responsible for our own energy and what we're putting out there. And it's not our job to be responsible for the other person's energy. Just what we're putting out there and what we're receiving and internalizing. So I get people that think, well, I just have to have really strong boundaries and I can be around this person all the time. And here's what I have to say to that. Good luck, because you'll need it. I'm pretty damn good at boundaries and at grounding and centering, and I cannot be around a vampire for more than, well, I prefer not to be around them at all, but I would say 2 hours is my very, very, very max, and even then I will have a headache, and it will take me a good full day to recuperate. Okay? So maybe y'all are better than me, and you can be married to somebody like this, or have a best friend like this, or be around your sister-in-law all the time who's like this. And if you can do it and be well, you seriously are a way better person than I am, because I just cannot do it. This is a very difficult archetype. And it's an archetype that a lot of healers will kind of attract into their life because vampires love healers. So you may have a client like this, but it will be the client that never gets better, that never sees their part in it. Hope I haven't depressed you too much with this archetype, but there's a big lesson here, guys. Even if you have this archetype 2%, healing it will change your life. So be willing to look at if you have any of this. If it's 2%, it's like not in your arcana. If it's like 10%, it's in your minor arcana. And if it's like above 60, actually even above 50%, it's in your major arcana. The whole purpose of this is to explore the depth and to do the healing that needs to be done. Whether it's the healing in yourself as the vampire or the healing in how to create boundaries with someone else who's a vampire. And if nothing else, you guys, give yourself permission to limit your time without feeling guilty about it. It's not good for you to have your energy depleted that way by the people in your lives. I love you. May your coffee be strong and your life be blessed. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. It really helps out my channel. And if you would be interested in working with me further, you can check out DawniAngel.com. I would love to come speak to your group, come to your business to do a training, be on your podcast, my personal favorite, or even work with you one-on-one.